Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jen Budd, your former senior Border Patrol agent turned immigrant rights activist. And today I have a very, very, very special guest. I have always been impressed by this woman and the work that she does. It's Sarah Kendzior. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Let me tell a little about who you are and why people should listen to you and read your writing. You're a scholar. You have a master's in Eurasian studies from Indiana University. Your PhD is in anthropology from Washington University. You're a best-selling author 3 times over, which makes me really jealous. Uh, soon to be 4 times over with the upcoming book, The Last American Road Trip. And you were known, I think, during the Trump administration. A lot of times you were on cable news networks a lot, and you were always telling us, this is what's going to happen. This is what Trump's going to do. This is and every time the people who interview you seem kind of like, well, I don't know, but you were right every single time. And now I watch these shows and they're saying the things now as if they've just discovered them on their own and figured this out. But you were talking about this stuff many, many, many years ago. And I feel like you're just not getting the credit you deserve. And what I notice now is you're concentrating on your writing in Sarah Kendzior's newsletter through Substack, which I'm really enjoying. Are you enjoying
Oh,
writing that?
yes, very much. I wish I'd started it earlier. It's been the most enjoyable thing I've done in a long time.
Have you ever heard of a guy named Paul Harvey?
Name is familiar, but I'm not
Might be
sure.
a little bit before your time, but he was kind of around mostly in the 60s and 70s and then a little bit through the 80s when he was old. And he always did radio shows and his thing was like Americana stuff. He's more on the
Mm-hmm.
conservative side, obviously, back then. But he always would say, and that is the rest of the story. But he would give these just really long explanations in the way he told his stories. And when I read your newsletter, which is definitely different than your books, it's definitely different than a lot of things that I've seen you write, where you bring in personal stories, traveling, Americana, what it is to be an American, the things that we love about America, and then you're weaving it into what we're going through today. And I think the one that got the most attention with a lot of the people who follow me was your recent one, Bad Weather.
Yes.
I think it just emotionally the fear that you can feel in your writing about how the sky turns, and if you've ever been lived in tornado areas, I have growing up in Alabama, you're right on in describing that, and then you go into and then you go into this thing where somehow you manage to blend it into the fact that we're learning that Republicans and Democrats they do agree on one thing, and that's that TikTok has to leave and Steve Mnuchin might buy it. And somehow you make all this like work together and make sense, and it has left a lot of people who follow me just gobsmacked and
Huh.
really amazed at this writing that you're doing. And I know how deep that level of writing is, and I just admire you a lot for that. And could you talk a little bit about the TikTok issue and the Steve Mnuchin and what's going on? Because it feels like I saw this back in 2010 in Hungary, is
Right.
what's going on here.
No, first is thank you so much for those kind words about my writing. And it's very gratifying to hear that, your own audience responded to it that way. Sometimes I feel like it's almost my subconscious that's writing that type of piece and I'm just typing it, like I'm just channeling it. And I think it is because, the fear and the emotion surrounding these issues is very intense, as is the love, as is the love for the country that we stand to lose. And that's something that I try to bring to the fore in a lot of what I'm writing, in part to just make it bearable for me and bearable for the readers, but also because it's true. It's real. It's something I
Mm-hmm.
feel every day as an American, as a mom, with 2 kids growing up in this country and looking to the future. And on that note, my introduction, my sole introduction to TikTok is through my children because I'm not on it. I banned the younger one from it. The older one is on it somewhat sporadically, but her friends are deeply immersed. And the reason the U.S. government wants to get rid of it. They've had this pretext for a while that it's about Chinese state surveillance, which I don't buy, even though there is a problem with Chinese state surveillance, but you'll find it on a variety of websites. You'll also find a problem with state surveillance from hostile foreign states in general on tons of websites, Facebook, Instagram, anything owned by Mark Zuckerberg. And often the hostile state is Russia or Israel or Saudi Arabia. We certainly see this with Twitter, with the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk and a lot of Saudi investors. And that's ignored. And I think the reason they're clamping so hard on TikTok is because through TikTok, a younger generation has learned the truth about what is happening in Gaza. And they've learned it from the ground up. This is not a matter of lectures or pontifications. It is footage. It's IDF soldiers bragging about the war crimes they've committed or filming themselves committing war crimes in Gaza. And it's Palestinians documenting the genocide that they are going through in real time. And we've kind of seen this before with Syria, and it was slower. I don't think we have in human history seen a genocide of this pace and its scope. Live tweeted from both the victim's perspective and the oppressors, and not just tweeted, obviously, posted, I guess, or whatever word you use for TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
They want to shut that down because the US government is who is funding this and making this possible. And Biden unilaterally, in some cases, has overruled Congress in order to send weapons and money to Israel, knowing full well what Netanyahu and the Kahanists, these extreme right-wing, extremely dangerous people in the Israeli government, would do with it. So they are complicit in the deaths of, over 30,000 Palestinian civilians, including about 15,000 children. And that's a low account. And they want to shut down that evidence. And what I wrote about in the bad weather piece, I think it was in this one, might have been one before, but anyway, I recently wrote that I feel like something worse is coming around the bend. And it's hard to imagine something worse than the mass death, the mass murder of children. That's the worst thing I think that anyone could possibly do, is abuse or hurt a child or kill a child. I think they're preparing for something that they absolutely do not want us to share or discuss or document or remember. They want to, whatever it is, they're going to want to block it out. And they have shown they're capable of anything. And by they, I mean this kind of transnational alliance of really horrific actors that I've been documenting for over a decade. And it's not just Israel, it's also the United States. It's participants, oligarchs and plutocrats from Russia, from the Gulf states, from a lot of places. It really takes a large effort here. And it scares me to think what it might be. I'm also worried about an attack within our borders, not for the reasons the Republicans say. I'm not worried about the, alleged migrant horde. I'm worried that because in the aftermath of 9/11, there was such an embrace of the police state, there was rationalizations for war that wouldn't have otherwise happened. I think they look at that and they, perhaps will look the other way if a terror attack is going to strike again. And, I know it sounds very conspiratorial, but it's like you literally have the former prime minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, saying, when terror comes to the West, and I'm kind of like, he's tweeting that, and I'm looking at it like, can you be a little more specific here? Like, are you just, vaguely alluding to a potential threat from perhaps the very angry, rightfully angry Palestinians who are slaughtering right now? Or do you have something specific in mind that we should be aware of? And if so, what? Shouldn't we be forewarned? I don't know. I feel it feels very pre 9/11. I have that kind of feeling that I had that year as well, which was also the year of the Second Intifada beforehand. And so it feels like history is repeating itself in the worst of ways. And I'm not looking forward to the year to come. And then throw in the election. So you really got a lot of things going on.
I feel exactly the same as you do. It's something's coming. And I've also heard Trump saying there's going to be a terrorist attack. There's going to be a terrorist attack. Yes, there's going to be a terrorist attack.
Guess who said that right before 9/11 in his book? Trump. Trump, who was a rando real estate guy, but who is hanging out with Felix Sater, who was in the Russian mafia, but was
Mm-hmm.
also working as an FBI informant, informing on Osama bin Laden. And then Trump, he claimed, he was like, I predicted 9/11. And as usual, I'm like, well, that's probably horseshit. This is like another thing about yourself you've made up. So I actually read Trump's terrible book that came out in 2000. And to my great shock, he did. Like, it's in there. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. It's not that wild a leap. It's like the World Trade Center was attacked before. So if he's speculating it's going to be attacked again, that's not crazy. It was attacked in 1993. Bin Laden had blown up embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. So, that's not a wild leap either. But yes, Trump implies that the World Trade Center attack is coming, that there'll be a big attack on American soil and it'll be Al Qaeda that does it. And that's not his main thing he writes about. He usually just writes about, how great he is and topics like that. So that stood
Mm-hmm.
out to me in that book, which of course is ghost written, like a lot of Trump's books, but it was in there for some reason. And, so when Trump says there's going to be a terror attack, I unfortunately pay more attention, even though he's a pathological liar, because I think that he is trying to set a scene, and I am scared about what he might know, seeing as he hangs with, as I said, mafiosos and people linked to arms traders, terrorists, mercenary armies, people like Eric Prince and so forth. Just
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. He also, I guess, is still getting intelligence briefings, which of course he should not, seeing as he fomented a
Right.
coup. So he would actually know something, which is a pretty horrific thing on its own. But what he might know is maybe even worse.
I remember, so it was 2015. I had my massive suicide attempt and my aha moment, and started looking at things and evaluating my own life and my actions in the Border Patrol. And I'm watching this whole thing, as Donald Trump comes down, being from Alabama. I knew what he was talking about when he said those words. I knew as a Border Patrol agent, the shit was going to hit the fan, and Border Patrol has always been waiting for this guy. They've been waiting for this
Yes.
guy. And it's one of the reasons why I left, when I understood what I joined, and so forth. But I remember the night when Hillary conceded, and my wife had been asleep, and she came out and I said Trump won, and she was like, what? you know and
Mm-hmm.
and I looked at her and I said, this cannot happen. It's not that our previous politicians aren't corrupt and haven't, we've had plenty of that, but there's a different level. And Donald
Yes.
Trump is in this. If you were alive in the 70s, so I was born in 71. If you were alive in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you know what Donald Trump is. If you stood
Mm-hmm.
in the grocery store in the 1980s waiting to go up to the cash register and you stared at all of the tabloids, you
Mm-hmm.
knew what Donald Trump was. Everybody in the world knows that Donald Trump is mobbed up in the
Yes.
70s, 80s, and 90s. And yet, the New York FBI doesn't do a thing about it. And we
Mm-hmm.
also knew that Giuliani was mobbed up,
Yep.
and all together with that. You don't even have to read Sarah's books to know this stuff. And what got to me is like, I kept looking at my wife going, did they know this is Donald Trump? You
Yes.
I mean,
It, it
and
it
I
was
said,
insane. But good.
something is really wrong if
Mm-hmm.
they think that this man, with all of the in intelligence and national security, if you owe money and you cannot have access to this. And what I
Yes.
realized over time is Donald Trump, and I can't prove it, but it seems to me, as a former intelligence officer and somebody who knows about operations, is that Donald Trump has been acting as a source for both the FBI and for Russia.
Yes.
And then you hear all the things where he's got the recording devices in his hotel rooms and all this, and that the people that are invited to these specific places are very rich and powerful people. So I feel like the major problem that we have with our congressional leaders, and I know people hate to say this because people have gotten into this Trump camp or Biden camp, and frankly, a lot of you in this Biden or die camp are just as bad as these Trump people.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like we've just gotten into this. I don't know how to explain it. I just keep looking around. Like, I feel like every day I get up and I'm like, it's Donald Trump, you people. I mean, this is who you're going to devote your life to. This is the most foul man I've ever seen in my life. Everybody knows he's corrupt. Everybody knows he's a criminal. And the fact that the Democrats cannot play offense or even defense in any of this tells me that they are trapped up in this too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most important thing is to see Trump not as an individual, but as part of a network. And that's where his utility as,
Mm-hmm.
what they euphemistically will call a confidential informant. I see it as a collaborator with corrupt elements in the government. But, he inherited from his mentor, Roy Cohn, a mafia lawyer slash fixer slash, general all purpose guy you contact if you want to do something dirty. If you're in the government, if you're in organized crime, if you're in entertainment or media, you go to Roy Cohn. That's who trained Trump, and Trump inherited his operation when Cohn died in 1986. And he's been, one of these main recurring players. And he's been surrounded by other people who Roy Cohn trained, like Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, who come back again and again and again. I mean, Manafort is returning for this campaign despite going to prison. And so, he is a node in a system. And I think that what the media has done is left out the story of the system. They have focused on
Mm-hmm.
Trump, the demagogue. They'll identify that he's a racist. They'll identify that he's hateful and awful. All of these things. That is not, in my experience, what will turn a potential Trump voter away from him. Because I've actually heard from people who voted for Trump in 2016, and then they read Hiding in Plain Sight, which is my book about how Trump got started and about all these mafia ties and about Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to that operation as well. And they've reconsidered. And it's not that they like the Democrats, they hate the Democrats. It's that they hate Trump for being as corrupt in their minds and truthfully as how they see the Democrats. They see him as no different. Like he's an insider, deep state, dirty actor with dirty ties to bad people in our government, making our country worse. And he's not as pro-America as he says. I mean, one would hope people would understand that by now. Although I think now the biggest impediment, it's like you said, the Democrats wouldn't play offense or defense. And the main reason that people who vote for Trump don't think he's dangerous is because the DOJ wouldn't hold him accountable. He fomented a coup in plain sight. He committed, a ton of crimes, most of which are now in paywalled articles, which people can't access, which affects their ability to remember exactly what it was like to live through that period with him as president. But he did all of this and nothing happened to him. And they didn't rush to contain him. They didn't rush to punish him. They've done nothing to the bigwigs in his network, to Stone, Manafort, Michael Flynn, Kushner, all of these other individuals. They're all allowed to just roam around free. And so the natural assumption people have is either he must not be that bad, or even worse, they think, well, he must have been right. Joe Biden really did steal the election. Donald Trump must be in the right. The DOJ knows it. So they are, so embarrassed. They're just kind of letting it slide and not doing anything to him. And it's really Biden we should be going after. That is a logical but incorrect conclusion to draw from it. But, if you're a outside observer, you haven't been following every little nuance of this, I understand how someone would come to that conclusion. And that is the fault of Merrick Garland and his DOJ. And it is very notable, I think, that his mentor was one Jared Kushner's lawyer, Jamie Garely, and that Jamie Garely has been basically the Democratic version of Roy Cohn for her entire career, immersed in every scandal from 9/11 to Fannie Mae to the opioid epidemic to police brutality. Like, she's the woman you call to clean up your dirty business. She's who advises the DOJ. She advises the January 6th committee, and she advises the Department of Homeland Security. So I don't know if, you ever had dealings with her. She's advising Mayorkas right now, and she's kind of been tangentially in that position for a while as a kind of board director. I don't know exactly the extent of her involvement. She shouldn't be there at all. Biden has her in multiple roles. He also put her in charge of a, quote, disinformation committee, which she co-chaired with Michael Chertoff, the Bush torturer, the guy who helped create the Patriot Act and did all this other awful stuff. Like, why is Biden putting these people in positions of power? Why did he uplift Iran Contra criminal Elliot Abrams, who's also again a Bush war criminal, into an advisory role right before Israel was attacked on October 7th? Why is Elliot Abrams back? He was also in the Trump
Mm,
administration.
hmm.
Like I said, the same guys. You just see them over and over getting recycled from the 80s onward, from basically Iran Contra onward. And there's a total refusal of the media and of politicians to look at this. And I'm sorry, but Joe Biden entered Congress before I was born. You know, he was like 30 years old and became a senator. He has been there as a firsthand witness to all of this, and often as a participant to all of this. He helped get Clarence
Exactly.
Thomas on the Supreme Court. So he knows he's the person who brought Jamie Goreli to the Clinton administration. Like, he is a direct antagonist in this story. My hope in 2020 was that because Trump was so over the top, proto autocratic mafia state level bad, that even Biden would see the light and be like, we clearly can't do this, or we're going to collapse as a country. And that he would actually, just continue his platform. Like, he ran on a very
Mm,
progressive platform. I was thinking, just implement it. That's it. That's all we're really asking for here. I mean, obviously we want more than that, but it's a significant start. If he had done that, instead, he did not do that. He implemented a lot of Trump's platform, including letting COVID spread, having a border wall, like being anti-immigrant, anti-migrant, building a cop city, like building multiple cop cities. That is who Joe Biden is. And now, it's culminating with genocide in Gaza. And so, it's really rough for those of us with a conscience to look at all of this and try to figure out, like, my God, in terms of electoral politics, what do we do? I think there's plenty of things people can do outside that sphere, thankfully, and we should embrace those rights while we have them, the rights to free speech and freedom of assembly and so forth. The labor movement, I think, too, that's been actually booming. That's been doing better.
hmm.
So that's like one bright sign that, oh my gosh, it is worse even than I imagined. I know you said before I predicted all these things correctly, and unfortunately I did, and so that's why we're in the shithole we're in now. But there's a few things that were so bad that even went by me. So, and unfortunately, Joe Biden implementing the Trump platform was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I knew when he took over because I had quite a few of people within the administration calling and saying, would I support this policy on the border? Would I support that policy on the border? And every time I was like, no, you know. And then I would go tell the people that I work with down here on the border, I'm like, he's not, he's not going to implement what he's telling y'all. He's
Mm-hmm.
doing something different, and he's going harder on the border than ever before. He took more money than Trump did from border surveillance technologies, which many of them are Israeli surveillance
Right.
technologies being used down here on the border. I mean, the Border Patrol looks completely different than when I was an agent. They use military tactics now that we didn't use back in the day because we considered ourselves a civilian police force.
Right.
But nowadays, it's interesting, this entire border drama. uh so I've gotten access to some intel documents that I'm going to be writing about and stuff. The entire border drama with the caravans during his administration, all that, and when they would say we have no idea who's coming to our borders, and we didn't know all those Haitians were going to show up. That's all a lie, and I'm going to prove
Mm-hmm.
it here pretty soon. They
Yeah.
had they even knew. I have documents where they knew who was sick, what sex they were, what ages they were, what countries they were from. They ran their records checks because they have connections with the Mexican government. So when the Mexican government started saying migrants now have to register with us if they want to travel through and get to the southern border, that was a ploy, and they were talking directly with Mexican immigration and
Wow.
and taking their documents and stuff. They were also CBP was also directly involved with knowing and encouraging Mexican officials to hold migrants who had documents to pass through the country. They were legally in Mexico in warehouses against their will where people died. So, so we'll be talking about that in the future. So it is,
Yeah.
and this is why I say the insurrections on the border. One of the things that bothers me so much is that everybody, you've seen the last few months where they're going back and forth this bill, and it's the exact bill Republicans want, and Democrats can't be rough enough or tough enough for them, and
Mm,
all this other crap. Most of what you all are seeing in the United States is not actually what's going on down here. So what they do is they intentionally force all the migrants to cross in one area right where the cameras are. And so they're working, the Border Patrol Union works hand in hand with right wing media and even Bannon's border bros, I call them. And then all the way up to Fox News OAN. They hold their hands, they take them right to where, so it makes it feel like if you walk
like
down
there's
here
a
to the border,
horde or something.
you're going to see a horde coming across. You will drive the border for days and not see anybody.
Right.
And it's not that there are not a lot of people crossing. There are a lot of people crossing. And the reason why they're crossing is because they will not let them present themselves at the port of entry. And when
Right.
you don't let people who need asylum, who are running for their lives, present at a port of entry, they're going to cross illegally. And they know that. That's why the Border Patrol wanted Title 42 back, because if you close down the asylum system, then it gives them the optics that they need. But
Right.
even in their heaviest days, this is how you know this is all fake. Even in their heaviest days, they were not apprehending more migrants per agent than we did back in the 90s with
Right.
revolvers and just a radio. It takes them like 10 people to arrest 10 people. It's ridiculous. Especially when people are give ups,
Right.
and just are like, yeah, it's the migra,
Right. Right.
and stuff. And so the stuff that they're putting out there are lies. And and at the same time, I don't think most Americans know that the Border Patrol was just a few blocks down the street on January 6th and chose to never respond.
Right. I actually didn't know that. So tell me
They
more about
had
that.
50 50 tactical, which means bore star, so that's, or a bore tac, that's the Border Patrol SWAT team, ready with all their gear sitting there ready to go. And they sat there for 3 hours. I'll send you the docs on it.
That sounds very similar to the National Guard
And
and much
they
of the
never
police.
responded.
Yeah,
And they
I
said, well,
have a lot
because
of
we never got
questions
a
about
phone
that
call.
day, and they go in a lot of new directions these days. But yeah, that's
So
interesting. I mean,
the thing about when I was saying, like I was telling my wife, that can't happen. He's a known criminal. He can't be elected president and this and that. That tells me FBI NYC is corrupt. That tells me
mhm,
FBI DC is um
yes.
has been penetrated by these criminals, because they would have gone after him for these tax evasion things. Those are easy.
Oh,
That's the easiest case to
easy.
make.
Or security clearance
Easy.
lies. And same with the people in his cabinet. Somebody like Kushner, who had lied on his security clearance forms more than any person who has ever been in the US government. You
Exactly.
can remove him. They could have, even if he got in, and he got in because of Jamie Grayleaf being his lawyer, even though he got in, you can get him out because they proved after he was in that he had done that. And the same was true of Stephen Miller. The same was true with Ivanka. The same was true with a lot of people in there. And
Mm-hmm.
they made no effort, even though, to me, that this was an obvious national security crisis. And I'm not like some kind of hawk, but this is like a real, blaring alarm
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
situation because Trump is a Kremlin asset. And I want to be
Yeah.
specific because people always get confused. They think he's some sort of James Bond super spy, and he's not. He's an
No.
asset. He's somebody of great utility to the Kremlin because the Kremlin is one of the keynotes of transnational organized crime. And the criminal syndicate that Trump is linked up to is not purely Russian. Like it'll be called the Russian mafia. But they have branches all over the world. It has a lot of oligarchs and mafiosos from the former Soviet Union of a variety of ethnicities, and they are aided in their goals by Westerners, by people like Paul Manafort, or for that matter, Bob Dole, who ran for president and then became a registered Kremlin asset. He was registered under FARA as working for Russia. People like Michael Flynn, like there are a lot of individuals involved. And so, yes, of course, you don't want somebody who is closely connected to, say, Semyon Mogilevich, the head of the Russian mafia, through proxies like Felix Sater and so forth, to be the president, and especially not someone who is a chronic bankrupt liar like Trump, who has had like more scandals and financial collapses than a person could count, hooked up to traditional American organized crime, which has kind of been replaced by the international version, like the way a lot of things did in the 90s. It's like neoliberalization of organized crime. But, you don't want that guy in. I mean, for God's sake, it's just so obvious. Like you said, we all knew who he was. Trump was not a man of mystery. When I was a child, he would be parodied on Sesame Street. He would be parodied in other children's television shows. Like Erie, Indiana had a whole episode about him being, a character called Donald, who was actually Satan. And then in the end, it's the IRS that brings him down because he's a tax fraud. And so when all of these publications, like the New York Times, are like, oh my God, we think Trump, has cheated on his taxes. Like, cheated on his taxes? It's like, is this Al Capone, like part two? He's a mobster. You all know it. All of you, you all covered it. There were so many people who would say to me in like 2017, you are crazy. You're a paranoid conspiracy theorist. Where do you even get your ideas? And I'd be like, from you, from your publication back when it did reporting. Like, all I'm doing is going through the archives of the Times, the Village Voice, New York, Vanity Fair, so on and so forth, and reading about Donald Trump, or reading Donald Trump's own books. Like The Art of the Deal describes his trip to Moscow, which was, hosted by Ronald Balder, who, basically is an Israeli asset. And they sent him off to Moscow on July 4th for the symbolic value. And he came back and started writing all these op-eds about why we don't need NATO anymore. It's like, Jesus Christ, people, it is not hard to figure out. Like, that's the thing. I'm not like a super sleuth. I'm just kind of, putting very obvious information together. But the key thing is, this is where it sort of plays into what I was saying earlier about TikTok. I was able to do all that because all of this is in the public domain. And back in 2015, 2016, very easy to find. You could use Google News, you could use Google Archives, you could use the archives of all these publications, no paywalls, everything's just hanging around there. So you're able to put together a timeline. Nowadays, a lot of those articles that I cited are deleted. Like, there's someone I know who reads my work and she just goes through and sees which citations, because it's a very heavily lawyered, heavily cited book, are missing. They're just flat out deleted because they don't want a record that this occurred. Or they're rewritten, or certain names are left out, or they're behind a paywall and it's just more difficult to find. And of course, Google search doesn't work. So I couldn't do now what I did back then. I could never write a book like Hiding in Plain Sight and gather that amount of information so quickly. With TikTok, I think that's kind of filling in that gap. I mean, streaming with video, I think is a disadvantage because it's harder to search, but it is providing evidence. It is providing firsthand evidence of state crimes. I mean, and there's also a lot of nonsense and bullshit on TikTok, like there is on any other social media platform. But within that, you are finding stuff that should be sent to The Hague if The Hague actually did anything, which they don't. And so that's the issue. They want us to not have a zone of information sharing. Same thing happened to Twitter a couple of years ago, and I predicted that was why Musk was buying it. That had nothing to do with money or profit or anything like that, or even with his ego. It had to do with controlling information, controlling activism, silencing activism, curtailing it, soft peddling, or what's the word? Shadow banning people, so that they, even if they speak, they can't be heard. That happened to me actually before Musk, but continues to happen to me and to others, and making a very frustrating.
Yeah, it happens to me.
Yeah, I don't see you unless I go and look for you directly. And there's, all the people that I see this happen to. I mean, honestly, the thing we have in common, it's not criticism of Trump, because that actually covers about 80% of Twitter. It's criticism of the DOJ and Biden that seems to be the tipping point of whether you're shadow banned. You can go on and say, Trump's a big orange asshole and like no one cares. But if you say Trump was, hooked up to the mafia and two former heads of the FBI went on to work for the Russian mafia after they left, which is true, by the way, that's the kind of thing that gets you shadow banned. That's dangerous information. And it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right when you're saying it. If you say it at all, that will get you, into a zone where it's very difficult for people to find you.
That's what I'm finding out on both Twitter and TikTok. I mean, sometimes it's amazing. I used to have like 40,000 followers and be able to get so much out there. But even when I do have thousands of followers, I think I've got a little over 7,000 on TikTok, and it's like it'll show for days 24 views. I'm like, huh?
Yeah,
You
no,
know?
it is wild. That's one of the reasons. I mean, and I do have problems with Substack as a company. Substack as a platform, like its utility, its ability to spread information is still pretty good, like, compared to Twitter, compared to a lot of these other
Yeah.
places. They don't seem to run interference on anybody. I guess it's that because we bring in money for them, unlike on Twitter, where
Mhm.
I guess technically, we don't. I mean, ads ostensibly bring in money, but that was a sinking network. And I don't know if that'll continue. I mean, I'm afraid now that I said that they're going to shut it down. But it's been interesting for me, like after having been on, primarily expressing myself through social media. Before that, I wrote for the Globe and Mail. I wrote for some mainstream places, but they all financially began to tank around 2021. And there's like a period where I was just writing books. And now I'm back and I'm sort of seeing how the new media ecosystem works. And the only places where it seems to be sort of functional are in these, newsletters on Substack, and that is not an across the board functionality. Like it works for me because I'm someone who has 3 books and
Mhm.
people know who I am. I worry very much about the talented writers, especially of the younger generation, but just anybody who don't have, like, they're not coming in with pre-existing reputations, but they're really good and they know stuff, they have expertise and so forth, who are being overlooked. And if back in the
Yeah.
day, Twitter would give them that advantage. Like you could get your message out through there, and it didn't matter if you weren't famous or rich or whatever. Like you still had an equal chance at getting your message across. They really want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of that capacity.
Down here on the border, what we've seen, at least with our local reporting, and our local reporting is best in Arizona, in New Mexico. Texas has some uh, fair amount of good spots. California is pretty bad on border reporting, though we did have a few reporters. They've gotten rid of all of them. They
Wow.
fired them all. And yeah, and so then you have our biggest ones have started their own Substack called the Border Chronicles, and they're really good. Um, but most of the reporters have gone to other outlets, and then those other outlets will just flat out tell them we don't want to say anything negative about the Border Patrol, and we don't want to say anything negative, about that. Right now, we have 3 chiefs in 1 year removed for sexual misconduct,
Wow.
and they won't respond. They won't respond, and the press is not digging into it. And because the oversight agency is ex border patrol agent, that's what we did when we created DHS. We did it before DHS when we were under DOJ. We take agents who have enough experience in who what we call bleed green. They are
Mm-hmm.
always green, and we put them in. The head of CBP's Office of Professional Responsibility, which is like their internal affairs, is a former Border Patrol agent.
Wow.
I mean, the investigators are former Border Patrol agents. We ran our own secret cover up groups until I came forward last year and outed them.
Right.
And then they just moved it into CPP. So this is what we see over and over again, but none of that stuff is ever really reported because they've taken our experienced reporters who understand the system and understand what's going on and gotten rid of them. And now we have these new young reporters who are like, okay, tell me everything you know about the border in 3 hours. I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah,
You know,
half of these folks,
how about
like
you
they
read
don't
my
even.
book?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that's sort of thrown me for a loop is that I don't think folks understand necessarily the world before 9/11, the world before the Department of Homeland Security, like how very, very different it was in terms of like how Americans conceived the border with Mexico, how what kind of militarization was thought of as acceptable, what was thought of as abnormal. And obviously there's always been xenophobia, there's always been people weaponizing the idea of people crossing, the Rio Grande or what have you. But it's like they just assume it's sort of always been there, this kind of really
Mm-hmm.
gigantic, bureaucratic, and often brutal system. And I've said, no, it,
No.
it just wasn't. I mean, and my experience is fleeting, but I keep thinking about this day, like when I was in college, I went to El Paso with my boyfriend, and we just took
Mhm.
a bus, and I didn't have a passport. You know, I just had my driver's license, and then we just got on a bus and went to Juarez. And we just went to Juarez for the day and hung out
Yeah.
and ate Mexican food and went shopping and, just did touristy things. And when we got back on the bus, we went back to El Paso. And it was the most unremarkable experience. It was like my first time, I think my only time, or one of my only times in Mexico. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is cool. Like we're kind of like sister cities. I mean, Juarez obviously had a lot of problems, but it was not at the extent it was in the 2000s, where it was,
Yeah.
incredibly violent. And I was like, this is cool. This is a really interesting kind of American experience. And I feel like I made it up. Like it feels so distant from both the imagery I see, but also the public conception of danger and who is dangerous and why they're dangerous and all these things, that it's like, wow, a simpler time. And the fact that I'm just crossing the border with my license, like no passport, no paperwork, no one really even investigating me, just
You
being
can
like, oh,
still do
okay, you're
that
good.
today.
Can you
You can still
really?
do it today.
Yeah.
If you're an American, they can't keep you from coming in. They can't
Oh,
keep you
that's
from
interesting.
coming
Oh,
in
if you're
if you're an
coming in like
American.
from the Mexican way and you have a like
From the
driver's
Mexican
license or
side.
something. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting
Yeah.
because I was so surprised. I mean, I had not really traveled much outside of America at all at that point. I think I'd been outside the country once, so I didn't know how things really were supposed to go. But it was
Yeah.
just, a nice little day that seems out of another lifetime. And
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things I want to tell you, because, we were talking about like my expertise is different than yours, and something that I think kind of bleeds into your expertise that I think you should know about. I've written about it before, but I know you're super busy and stuff. But so essentially, the deal is the United States Border Patrol and CBP, before Trump left office, they were able to have bargaining units and unions.
mm-hmm.
And that is because they were not designated as security agencies. Your designation of security agency comes from the president. And in the past, they did not give that to CBP and Border Patrol because they were not doing that much in intelligence activities. But they really wanted this. But at the same time, both agencies said, and I have this documented in 2016, where they both agencies said, if we get this designation as a security agency, then we lose by law, by 5 USC 7112 lowercase b6. By law, we cannot have bargaining units. That's
Mm-hmm.
national security law. Lots of people have tried to get around it. Lots of presidents have said no, between Carter and Bush and all of them.
Right.
And the idea is that the level of intelligence that you're exposed to, the government feels is threatening, and they have to be able to fire you and hold you accountable if they need to, because you could be selling this information. Now, that may be a whole bunch of bullshit,
Right.
but let's just assume that, I mean, this is the law. This is the
This is
law.
very interesting
So,
in light of who recently ran our government, but yes.
okay. So before Trump leaves, collectively in the past, the 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 bargaining contracts that they've had with the president and with everybody has to sign an agreement. Collectively, the entire United States Border Patrol would allot 18,000 hours to Border Patrol agents who are also assigned as union stewards. So if I
Mm-hmm.
get into a shooting as a Border Patrol agent, my union steward from my station will be able to take hours from that 18,000 hours and help me with my case. Right?
Right.
Okay, fine. And he changed it and he added more Border Patrol agents to become stewards, specifically on the southern border. So
Trump
he
did,
took them
you
from
say?
like, I don't know, yeah, from like 30
Mm-hmm.
or something, he more than doubled the amount. So now
Oh,
you have more and made them permanent. So they're not in uniform 4 days a week and maybe 1 day a week doing union stuff. Now they only do union stuff.
okay.
And they increase the hours from 18,000 a year collectively to 154,000. They have no cause for this,
Uh-huh.
but the one thing they have done is I've documented it. And when all this started, when Biden won and got in office, the union representatives working together with these alt-right, Breitbart and all these other guys,
Mm-hmm.
creating crossings and filming them. They got CNN to do a fake crossing. Me and Mariana were like, that's a fake crossing. That's a fake crossing.
Oh
Don't
my
put it out,
God.
CNN. They still put it out. They got away with it. There was an article written about it, I think, in the American Prospect about how we busted them on that.
Right.
CBP OPR has been investigating that for longer than the Mueller case. They still aren't
Uh-huh.
sure what really happened. But you
Uh-huh.
see what happened? And they even warned ahead of time in the papers that even Border Patrol management said, you cannot take this many people and put them in the union and not have them work as Border Patrol agents. And he was like, screw you, I'm going to do it. What he's done and what you see if you ever follow the Border Patrol union on Twitter and stuff, this union is completely rogue. They are sharing and working hand in hand with Donald Trump. This
Wow.
whole press junction and everything that you see down here is all fed by the Border Patrol union. It's all fed by the Border Patrol union. And they lie about everything. They lie about everything. And it's a press op. It's an op, a
Right.
psyop, whatever you want to call it. And nobody will address it.
It's
Not a single
very
person. And the thing
interesting.
is they're actually illegal. And I happen to know an attorney who I worked with. We sent Biden an actual executive order written the way it should be. He could get rid of them tomorrow if he wanted to, and he won't do it.
See, this is very, I mean, I think I knew about this only from following you on Twitter to the extent that Twitter would show me it. It's very alarming to me because when you get to this point in the stages of a autocratic takeover, which is basically what we've been under for the last 8 years, and it's more of a mafia state kind of takeover than a Hitler-like takeover, although people like to draw that comparison. But the
Yeah.
question it boils down to in the end is, what is the military going to do? And do you have a military that backs your country? Or do you have mercenary armies and paramilitias and independent
Mm-hmm.
groups that are only loyal to a leader, regardless whether that leader is duly elected, regardless whether that leader is actually representing the country that he purports to represent? And if there's a giant force of rogue border patrol units doing things like hanging out on January 6th and not intervening, or the activity that you just described, and that to me says that they're getting things into gear, especially if they have them coordinated to the point that they're staging, horde crossings for Fox News and propaganda videos. Like that means you're at the later stages of an attempted
Mm-hmm.
takeover. You're not at the beginning at
Mm-hmm.
all.
And all they do is drive around all day long with the camera crews and take them to where the migrants are. So everybody thinks because they see these pictures that it's just inundated with migrants everywhere, and it really isn't.
Right.
It's not. And they have to do these things like these massive where they take people who have been inspected and passed and came through the ports of entry, and they release them all in buses. But these union guys tell them, the border patrol's telling the union, we're going to release them down here at J Street and this and that, and they go okay, and then they get Fox News and Bill Malugin and those guys
Mm-hmm.
over there to film it, so they know exactly where they're going at all times. It's really interesting to watch the Bannon border media guys come down here first, and then they put out these bullshit stories, and then you see the middle guys like Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, those guys, then they pick it up, and then slowly it's starting to make its way into even mainstream media. CNN News, MSNBC a lot of times is using the footage that these guys are getting, and all this is performative down here. This is all
Yeah.
performative.
And what frightens me about it is that it has this de facto idea that migrants are inherently dangerous, inherently bad. That these people who are real people and being used as human props are somehow innately going to, either kill you or steal your job. Like that's basically the spectrum that they're allowed instead of, flee for their lives, from a country with
Mm-hmm.
cartel wars and violence and all of these things in the hopes of protecting their children, in the hopes of protecting themselves, which is, the general story that is the case for most migrants. And I feel like this has been drilled into people's heads, even if they don't know much about the situation. They're just like migrant equals bad, and that really frightens me because it's xenophobic, it's profoundly anti-American, it's made life incredibly painful for a lot of these migrants. We have people and they send them to St. Louis. Like St. Louis is a cheap cost of living. It's changed some of our demography, I think, for the better.
Hmm.
I welcome
Yeah.
them. I'm glad that there are people from, Honduras and Colombia and, and other countries in that region that are living here. I think it's great. But there's also like they have to contend with the built-in prejudice. Granted, that's always been there, and it has been amplified not just by Fox News, but by the Democrats when they try to push forward these bills. These like, look how far right our bill is, and oh my God, they still didn't sign it. Like they'll say things like that. I'm like, do you not understand how offensive you are? I mean, first you're offensive because you're going back on all of your campaign promises, but you're also just offensive to this group of human beings who you are not acknowledging as human at all. You're using them as pawns, in another way, in a different way than Fox, but really pretty connected. You're trying to show, oh, I'm such a hard ass. I can be mean to like little migrant children too. And I mean, they just look like phenomenal assholes. And I don't know who exactly they think this will play to, because if you already are on the side of like Fox News, if that's where you're getting your information, you're not like voting for Biden or the Democrats anyway. So it's just sort of trying to normalize this idea of like migrant equals bad, Latin America equals bad, everybody's dangerous, crime is up, all these things that end up always being debunked as exaggerated or lies. And it's depressing. It's very, people describe it as Trumpian. Of course, it predates Trump. After 2020, the goal was to try to, undo some of the damage that Trump's mainstreaming of, white supremacist radical movements had done. And instead, they just basically embrace those same tenets and they wrap it in a kind of softer language, but it's still there. Like the hatefulness of it, I think, still is there.
Yeah, I often say the difference between Republicans and Democrats on the border is that Republicans like to brag about their brutality, and the Democrats
Yes.
just act like they're not brutal, but they are just as brutal as the Republicans are. I mean, it's just I'm very concerned. I see the Border Patrol and CBP being used against American citizens. They've been trying to get further into the interior of the United States. They're trying to get peace officer authority. That's been a big thing down here where we have our peace officers acting like they're immigration officers and our immigration officers demanding that they now be seen as peace officers without any training and without any authorities being given to them. And I see at the same time the Biden administration is just kind of ignoring all of it and just like, oh, well, I don't know, I guess okay.
It's
And nobody's addressing this legally
right.
whatsoever. And they just kind of seem to want to ignore it. But I guarantee you that the Border Patrol is going to be used against American citizens again here pretty soon. Over the last 30 years, and this is a new talk I've been given. Over the last 30 years, you look at the immigration enforcement uh, through ICE, through Border Patrol, and CBP, and they meet all five elements of genocide. Now,
Wow.
especially since Trump ordered the taking of children, that was the last hurdle. The only reason why this isn't considered a genocide down here, because we've killed the official numbers 10,000 migrants since 1994 have died
Oh my
from
God.
us pushing them to the most dangerous areas. This is why so many agents try and kill themselves, is that experience. It's actually more closer to 50 to 100,000
Wow.
because they don't count the bodies that other people find. They only count the bodies that Border Patrol finds, and we're ordered most of the time to not find the bodies. And so
Wow.
they have been hiding the deaths. And we're not talking about big giant men who were trying to bring drugs in this. We're talking
Right.
about women freezing to death with their children in their arms.
Right.
We're talking about newborn babies out on a trail
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so the only
And
reason
it's
why it's
weird
not
how this has
considered,
been dropped. I mean, I'm just thinking about what a
nobody
big
talks
deal
about it.
issue this was during Trump's 4 years, even though it was also going on during Obama. But the separation of families, the abuse
Hmm.
of children, that was something that people, at that
It's
point
still going on.
unilaterally, yeah, it's still going on. And they've
Yeah.
decided to just stop talking about it or to try to rationalize it where there's no justification for it. And I feel like that is, of a piece with what's happening in Gaza, where you're seeing the mass slaughter of children and they're trying to rationalize that. And to some extent, you even see it with COVID, where they try to blow off mass deaths or disabilities from that. It's all this just
Yeah.
playing down of pain and suffering or death of the most vulnerable people in our nation
Hmm.
or trying to get into our nation. And it's just, it's appalling, but it's really scary to me to watch how quickly people will drop a humanitarian issue if their political pull tells them to, which is what I've seen happen with Biden. Whereas if
They
Trump
haven't
did
said
it,
anything.
yeah,
I mean, under Biden, we have outdoor camps all through the mountains out here where they're holding asylum seeking families, and it's the desert, the high desert out here. It snows in the wintertime, and they are hiding in porta potties,
oh my
trying
God,
to stay warm. And the chief down here puts out things like Border Patrol agents save migrants' lives. And it's what? What are you talking about? And nobody's reporting on it. They've had people die sitting in their camps waiting to be processed.
that is,
And
I
nobody
mean,
reports on it. We've got a Border Patrol agent out in the Hukumba camp who likes to whip out his dick and show it to all the little girls and boys and women around. We've got them on video, and they
Jesus
still won't do shit
Christ.
about it.
Yeah.
Nobody will report this stuff because we don't want to talk bad about Border Patrol agents. It's like,
Is it rooted
that's
in like
scary to me.
in election stuff, like politics stuff, or is it just a general not wanting to critique
It's people
authority
are
or
self-censoring themselves. I have people tell me all the time, they're like, I follow you, I follow everything you do, but I'm not going to like anything you do because I'm afraid people are going to see that I like the stuff you do,
good
and I
God.
know you have a
Yeah, I
target
get
on your
that
back.
too.
And
But
people are self-censoring like crazy down here. But the
yeah,
Border Patrol is completely rogue. I have supervisors who have like a couple of years in call me, and they're like, unless you're a hardcore Trumper and you believe all these migrants are terrorists and should just die and we should be able to shoot them, you're not welcome in the Border Patrol anymore.
wow. Good God.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
yeah, and it
So,
is frustrating because it's all one thing. And I think a lot of times when people don't live near that region, they see it as a regional issue, as something that's not representative of a broader philosophy, where it is, and it's top down. Like you said, it's something that Biden can certainly control or end or put an executive order about or change the personnel or what have you. And what you instead see is like, Republican attacks, impeachment attempts on Mayorkas and stuff like this,
mhm.
to make it look like they're the opposite of what you're saying, to make it look like they're very weak, they're very soft, they're ineffectual, they're, definitely not brutal. Because when Mayorkas was almost impeached, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm not completely opposed to that, but for the complete
I'm not completely
diametrically
opposed either.
opposite reasons that everyone is saying. I'm like, you're abusing children. Like you should be impeached or removed from your position. So I was not really, I didn't have a
Yeah.
problem. I certainly wasn't going to stand up for him after all he's done. But it's because he's the opposite of everything they said. He's not letting in hordes of migrants. He's like overseeing a system of abuse, of vigilantism, and,
Yeah.
and doing nothing about it. And like, I don't know. It's
Mhm.
really maddening.
Well, I think they blamed him for fentanyl too, and that's something that I've started talking about a lot in fentanyl circles. Is like, because they think, yeah, most of the fentanyl is coming through the ports of entry, but what they don't understand is, so the media will say migrants crossing illegally, and fentanyl's getting into the country. So in the listeners' minds, they think migrants are related to
Right.
fentanyl. Migrants are not bringing fentanyl. It's usually Americans or it's drug smugglers that bring fentanyl across the
Right.
border. And the majority of it comes through the ports of entry legally. They either bribe the CBP officers, or CBP runs a program where if you would like to pre-authorize that you've checked your truck doesn't have any drugs in it, then you can buy this expensive thing and bring in the semi trucks. All the fentanyl, everybody who works in CBP or Border Patrol knows this. The vast majority of these dangerous drugs that are killing people come through massive shipping containers, either on the railroads that come through El Paso or through semi trucks that come through ports of entry, and especially shipping containers. All three of those areas, CBP only checks 3.7% of the cargo containers.
So they're aware.
That's where all your drugs
They
come
know
from.
where it's coming from.
They know it. And they don't want to
Hmm.
slow that down. And why don't they want to slow that down, Sarah? Because if they slow that down, it slows down the economy and it slows down capitalism. And
Right.
I guarantee you that get closer to the election, we're going to start seeing ports slow down. I saw El Paso Border Patrol actually close down the railroad that goes back and forth. And that was a major deal just for like 3 days. It's
Hmm.
going to be a lot worse. But the fact is if they really wanted to stop fentanyl, they would actually start investing in inspecting the shipping containers, but they don't want to because it'll slow down the economy. So they're going to blame the
Right.
migrant.
Yeah, no,
So,
a lot of it reminds me of, the 80s. It reminds me of like Iran Contra, where they were fully aware of where all
mhm.
the cocaine was coming from, and later where, all the heroin was coming from, and why we, in part, had an Afghanistan war, or at least one of the side benefits of an Afghanistan war. And you see that, that switch in what kind of drugs are being peddled on the streets when these various international operations end. And that's something that I feel like it supersedes any administration, like regardless who we vote for, that kind of mercenary government activity, wrapped up in the drug trade just continues and continues. And when we bring it up, everyone's like, oh, conspiracy theory. But it's like, no, really, they did it. Like they basically admitted it. There were journalists who documented it. Unfortunately, sometimes there's people like Gary Webb who end up getting murdered. But it's a real deal problem. And in that case, like everyone's correct when they talk about the danger and violence of the cartels. As you just said, the people coming through, the people who they're actually prosecuting and abusing are not like the cartel heads. Like that's who gets in. That's who gets away with it. It's regular people. It's the victims of the cartel violence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very depressing to see. I mean, I'm gonna have to amplify more of what you're working on because I think people need to know. And it is frustrating that there isn't just general mainstream concern about all the many, many ways that this can, spiral and worsen and affect our lives and be something that we're all having to engage with, regardless where you live. Like I hope people living in Missouri like me understand, this
Yeah.
affects us, and this is part of a national problem. And then when it comes to be election day, which I think will again be a time of violence, the period between election day and
I agree.
inauguration day, regardless who wins. I would imagine the Border Patrol again are going to be put into whatever kind of use is deemed necessary for whatever kind of shit show they're planning.
Hmm.
And I don't know precisely what that is yet,
Hmm.
but something not good. So
They have no problem, responding to BLM protests, but they cannot respond to the Capitol when senators and representatives are asking for help. I think that's all you need to know about their motto, honor first. So thank
yep.
you for coming and doing this today. Like I said, I think I could ask you questions and sit here forever, but we both have
Yeah, we should
lives
do
and
this
other
again
things we have to
sometime.
do. But
Good fun,
with
wholesome
seriously,
topics
anytime
over
you want to,
here.
I
Yeah,
know
for
stuff that
sure.
nobody else wants to talk about, or when we talk
That's what
about it,
you
they go,
should call your
oh,
show. Stuff nobody else wants to talk about. I'll talk
I
about it with
should. I should
you.
change it to that. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll think about it. If it starts getting picked up or anything, maybe I
There
will.
you
So,
go.
all
All
right.
right. Well,
Okay.
thank you for
Well,
having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for all
anytime,
you
my
do.
friend.
Okay.
Oh, you too. I know what it is to stick the neck out there, and you're doing it, and I appreciate you, and I'll steer everybody I can towards your work always.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
so much
you.
for what you're doing for this country and what you're doing for Americans. I just really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And you too.